Imagine a country going to war, but not with soldiers or ships, but with money. A day where a government gambles absolutely everything to defend its national currency against the most powerful financial forces on the planet and loses. Today, we're diving into the incredible story of Black Wednesday.
And that question, it's not just some thought experiment. On September 16, 1992, the United Kingdom found itself in exactly this fight. Its opponent wasn't another nation. It was the entire global currency market. And the stakes, its economic credibility, and its future.
Okay, so to really get what happened, we're not going to start at the beginning. Nope, we're jumping right into the heat of the battle. It's the morning of September 16th, the British government is in a full-blown panic, and the pound is in absolute freefall.
To try and stop the bleeding, the government pulls a move of pure desperation. They announce a plan to hike interest rates from an already high 10% all the way up to 15% in a single day. Think about that. It's like slamming on the emergency brake of the entire national economy, just hoping to scare off the attackers. And you have to understand, the sheer scale of this fight was just mind-boggling. At the same time they're announcing this crazy interest rate hike, the Bank of England is literally burning through its cash reserves. We're talking billions of pounds an hour buying their own currency to prop up the price. But it didn't matter. The selling was just too relentless. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. So you're probably asking, how on earth did the UK get into this mess? Well, the answer is a trap, one that was actually set years before. Let's rewind the clock and see how this all got started. See, back in 1990, Britain joined something called the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, or the ERM. The easiest way to think about it is like a currency club. The whole idea was to create stability by locking all the major European currencies together, pegged mostly to the strongest one in the group, Germany's Deutschmark. And the main rule was simple. You had to keep your currency's value inside a very tight lane. And right there, that's the heart of the problem. The UK and Germany were living in totally different economic realities. Germany had this powerhouse low-inflation economy, but Britain, it was struggling big time, high inflation, and a really painful recession. Tying the weak British pound to the super-strong German mark was basically like shackling a tiny rowboat to a massive battleship and expecting them to travel at the same speed. It just wasn't going to work. This whole situation created this awful, damaging paradox. See, to keep the pound's value high enough to stay in this ERM club, the government had to keep interest rates painfully high. But high interest rates are the absolute last thing you want during a recession. They make it super expensive for businesses to expand and for people to borrow. So the very policy meant to project strength was actually just choking the life out of the British economy.
Now, a weakness that obvious, it doesn't go unnoticed. A group of savvy currency speculators were watching all this unfold, and they saw a massive opportunity. They saw a currency that was basically on life support, being held up artificially, and they decided, you know what, we're going to bet against it.
The logic behind this bet, made famous by the investor George Soros, was brutally simple. He and others looked at the situation and saw a fundamental contradiction. You've got a country in a deep recession trying to maintain an artificially strong currency. They just didn't believe it was possible, politically or economically, for the UK to keep inflicting that much pain on its own people just to defend some arbitrary exchange rate. They were betting that sooner or later reality was going to win.
Okay, so how do you actually do that? How do you attack a currency? Well, the process is surprisingly straightforward when you break it down. First, you borrow billions and billions of British pounds. Second, you immediately sell all of those pounds on the open market, swapping them for a stronger currency like the German mark. This huge flood of selling just overwhelms any buyers and forces the pound's value down. Then, once the currency is crashed, you use your marks to buy back the pounds you need, now at a massive discount to pay back your original loan. Everything left over? That's pure profit.
And that brings us right back to that chaotic day, September 16th. With the speculators' attack now in full swing, the British government is in this frantic, hour-by-hour fight, just trying to survive.
Just look at this timeline. It shows you how absolutely bonkers this day was. All morning, the Bank of England is just hemorrhaging money. At 11 a.m., they announce the first rate hike to 12%. The market just shrugs, doesn't even flinch. The selling keeps going. So a few hours later, they announced that truly shocking plan to go to 15%, still nothing. By this point, the market had decided the UK's position was a lost cause. By the evening, the government had thrown everything it had at the problem and nothing worked. They were out of ammo. They had to surrender. So, the government throws in the towel. They announce that the UK is leaving the ERM. The pound was no longer tied to anything. Its value would be decided purely by the markets. And just like the speculators had bet, it immediately plunged, collapsing in value. The war was over, and the markets, they had won, decisively.
So this was a total disaster, right? A complete national humiliation, a devastating political defeat. But what if the story doesn't end there? What if I told you this catastrophic failure was actually one of the best things that could have happened to the British economy?
For a long time, everyone just called it Black Wednesday, and for good reason. It absolutely shredded the government's reputation for being good with the economy and became this symbol of national failure. But then a funny thing happened. As the years went by, some economists started calling it something totally different, White Wednesday. So why the change? Why the complete 180? Well, because that humiliating defeat accidentally liberated the British economy from the very trap it had been stuck in. And the results were immediate and profound. Freed from the ERM, the UK could finally do what its economy was screaming for: slash interest rates. This suddenly made borrowing cheaper for businesses and regular people. On top of that, the now cheaper pound made British products way more competitive overseas, which gave a huge boost to exports. So instead of making the recession worse, this crisis actually kicked off a long period of economic growth.
And this chart really tells the whole story. Look at this. Before the crisis, you've got interest rates stuck up at 10%, just strangling everything. But after, they were free to slash them all the way down to 6%, and they just kept on falling. It was like taking that emergency brake off and finally hitting the gas.
And the long-term legacy of Black Wednesday was huge. This whole painful experience led to major policy changes. The Bank of England was eventually made independent to keep these kinds of decisions away from political pressure. And, this memory was a massive factor in why Britain ultimately decided not to adopt the single European currency, the euro, choosing to keep control of its own currency instead.
It really makes you rethink what success and failure even mean, doesn't it? Black Wednesday was, without a doubt, a complete and total defeat for the government that day. But was that defeat the necessary price to pay for a much bigger, long-term economic win? It leaves you wondering, how many of our worst moments are actually just setting us up for a much better path forward?